Hello and welcome. My name is Nicholas and this is Literally Graphic. Content warning for visual representation of lynching. It's fairly stylized, but if you continue, please be prepared. And today I'm going to be highlighting a random pickup I made at the library recently that turned out to be super interesting. Namely, I see The Promised Land with words by novelist, essayist, performance poet, professor at Syracuse University's Arthur Flowers, and pictures by Patua scroll artist Manu Chitrakar. Apologies for pronunciation, especially with the art form. I wasn't able to find a pronunciation guide, so if you know how to pronounce either of these things, please let me know, and many apologies. This cross-cultural collaboration was first published in 2010 by Terra Books and later published in 2013 by Groundwood Books, with my edition being the latter. I'm not sure if any changes were made. The covers look different. As I already mentioned, the author, Arthur Flowers, is a widely talented writer who, as of the second publication of this book, was working at Syracuse University's MFA program in creative writing, the executive director of the Harlem Writers Guild, co-founder of the New Renaissance Writers Guild, and the Pan-African Literary Forum. He describes himself as in the author bio as a literary heir to both the Western written tradition and the African oral one, which are both demonstrated very well in my much less authoritative opinion. The artist, on the other hand, is a Patua scroll artist, again, pronunciation, a tradition from Bengal, India, where Manu Chitrakar still lives, where artists not only paint narrative scrolls, but then go around performing them in song for different groups of people. Other scrolls that Chitrakar is known for include one about 9/11, which I have linked to a description of in the description. Yet another biography of Martin Luther King Jr., I See the Promised Land, is not just any biography of MLK, unique, at least in my experience, in just how far it can get from being normative white/Western storytelling while still being comprehensible to monolingual old me. I also appreciated the choice by Flowers to, rather than to simply frame this as cut and dry nonfiction, weave this well-known narrative into a more mythic, religious-styled text, focusing on what he calls the Fa of MLK. It's an obvious choice in retrospect, but definitely outside the mold as far as biographies go, and since one of my reading goals is to normalize experiences of people who I'm tempted to see as other, this is a book I would highly recommend to my white settler peers as helping in that area. That said, there were 2 points that bothered me somewhat, namely the way in which the efforts of the few female-identified people who do show up in the narrative are very downplayed, namely the representation of Rosa Parks as being too tired to move to the back of the bus. This is certainly not the only place I've seen this being the reasoning behind her actions, but I was under the impression that it had been largely refuted and replaced with the truth that she was a trained activist who was deliberately setting off a legal battle. Perhaps the conflict is framed this way, and very briefly, because of the mythic quality Flowers is going for in his narrative, but it does feel like a step back in the representation of Black women in the civil rights movement, and as far as I recall, only one other female, besides perhaps MLK's wife and the woman he had an affair with, who go unnamed, is mentioned, and she is denoted as the secretary of the organization. The other fact I wanted to note, mostly to my white peers who grew up in the white supremacist society and culture of the United States of America, as I certainly don't want to dictate to BIPOC people how they should or should not feel about MLK. This narrative felt like it might tempt myself and others to perpetuate the idea that there were good Black people and bad Black people in the civil rights movement, namely MLK was a good pacifist and Black Panthers were a violent thorn in his side who should be derided whenever possible. While there's no arguing that MLK and the Black Panthers had different ideologies and likely had particular points of conflict, I'm not an expert, this brief summarization complements rather than challenges the ways in which the white supremacist culture of the USA has fetishized MLK and an exaggerated representation of his pacifism. I'm very tempted to apologize for this tangent, as it has more to do with me than likely with the book itself, but it seemed like I really needed to point this out, as I believe most of the people who I interact with this channel identify as white Americans or Canadians. Visually, this was a rich, deep dive into a culture not my own, looking back at me, my culture, and my history. That's so freaking cool. And while I want to say more, it kept feeling like I was coming across as tokenizing or patronizing, so I think I'll just shut up now. I hope that some of you pick up this book and that I get the opportunity to read more projects like this. As always, if you have any recommendations for me that this reminded you of, please share. Bye y'all, keep reading and resist fascism. And as always, I would like to acknowledge that for the most part, all of my videos are filmed and produced on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, an Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation, land covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant.